welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. All of my listeners know who I am, but the lovely woman on the other side of the screen is Sheryl Anjanette, and she lives in Rancho Santa Fe, California, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from Encinitas, where we record this podcast from. Good day to you, Sheryl. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, great. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on the show finally. And for all my listeners, I don't always get to meet my authors in person, but actually, Sheryl, I got to have lunch, which was really nice. And here's the book. You can actually see it on her desk right by her. You can see it there. This book is really The Imposter Lies Within, Silence Your Inner Critic, Tame Your Fear, Unleash Your Badassery. And Sheryl is the person that can speak with you about this. I'm going to let our listeners know, Sheryl, a little bit about your background. And for all of my listeners, you can go to Sheryl, SherylanJanette.com to learn more about her and more about the book. And she also is quite the entrepreneur, too. She has more than 30 years of business experience as an accomplished entrepreneur and senior executive. She's the founder and CEO of Anjanette Wellness, offering business and mindset programs for individuals and organizations through on-site training, speaking, and online learning in areas of imposter syndrome, burnout, and peak performance. She holds certifications across multiple business and mindset disciplines that are essential to individual and organizational health. These advanced trainings include cognitive behavioral neuroscience, integrative hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, clinical stress, anxiety, and self-regulation, strategy, and human performance improvement. As a key thought leader in this area, she speaks, she shares her message with organizations globally. And again, for my listeners, here's the book. Well, this is a great place for us to start. And that is for you. I think many people hear this word, the imposter syndrome. They don't always know what it means. Why is it important for people to recognize this inside of themselves, really the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think it's always really helpful when we're having behaviors, we're having symptoms of things, and we don't know where they're coming from. And when we can understand it, it's like somebody having a diagnosis, right? If you're going around and you're feeling really lousy or having trouble getting out of bed or that stomach ache that just doesn't go away, if you have a diagnosis, you know what it is, then you can do something about it. And I think a lot of us, and I spent most of my decades really of my life walking around with all of these symptoms and not having a name for it and not understanding what it really is because, imposter syndrome, there are a lot of misunderstandings about what it is. And I get into the myths a lot, but just not understanding what it actually is. And that throws people off and they start going off in the wrong direction in their healing. And to really get to that healing, we need to be on the right path with the right.
So you've had your own personal journey, like you're explaining, and most authors do when they write books around topics, right? It's like, this, I'm passionate about this. I want the world to know. What was your personal journey in overcoming imposter syndrome, and what are the key turning points for you? And I say overcoming, and I'm going to use that word kind of lightly. I think it's really more about identifying, right, what it is that we're doing, and then working to release that. So because you're grounded in all of these great things like neurolinguistic programming and hypnotherapy, we know the subconscious mind is a big element to this. So I'd love to have you address that with the listeners.
Sure. And if you don't mind, Greg, I'd love to just kind of go back and give imposter syndrome a definition.
Yeah, I'd love to have you do
Everyone
that
can kind
too.
of get their heads around. So imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern, emphasis on pattern, where someone feels like they're not good enough despite evidence to the contrary. So it's patterned, it's habitual, and we don't always think about it this way, but it's not just our behaviors that become patterned. Our thoughts become patterned, our beliefs become patterned, our self-talk becomes patterned. So there are all these layers going on that become patterned on autopilot. And it's despite evidence to the contrary. So there's evidence that we have all of these accomplishments, and yet we still feel disconnected from them. So you can look at a piece of paper, you can see your certifications, your degrees, you get up and speak in front of an audience, you make these great movies, whatever your zone of genius is, you do it, you do it, you do it, you do it. And inside you feel, it's like, I know, but you feel like, I'm a fraud. I'll never be able to do it again. I'm going to be found out. Someone's going to tap me on the shoulder at any moment and tell me, that's not really you. You're a fraud. You're a fake. And
Mm.
so it's a cognitive dissonance. It's a disconnect. And it's really interesting because when we don't understand this, people often will say, it's just doubt. You're just having doubt, and or it's just your inner critic is being really harsh. And all those things are part of it. It's like there's a collective of all these little things that happen, but you can have doubt and you can have a harsh inner critic and still be able to be connected to your accomplishments and say, yeah, I did it and I'm proud of that. And that's great. When you have that disconnect, when you feel like quietly inside, like, oh God, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. Nobody's going to believe this. I don't care how many times I've done it. I don't care how many degrees I have. Everybody else in the room is better than me. I'll never live up to it. That's imposter syndrome. And that's where the word comes. You're not actually an imposter, and nobody else thinks you're an imposter. It's that we feel like we're the imposter, hence the name, the imposter lies within. It lies within. It's inside of us. And it's a liar. It's not true. You really do have those accomplishments. And so for me, I was in this journey of, I've been in the corporate world for decades, and I had done this really deep dive. And for the past 7 years, I've been immersed in studying human emotions and behavior. And I did a very advanced certification in hypnotherapy. So multiple types of hypnotherapy and cognitive behavioral neuroscience and clinical stress and anxiety and self-regulation, because I really like to help people. And I was really doing this deep dive, and I was trying to help people get what they want, which another word for that is manifestation, right? Get
Hmm.
what I want. I say I want this, but I'm not getting there. And I was working with groups and individuals, and they were all saying, I'm doing all the things, why isn't it working? And then I discovered, oh, this imposter syndrome. And I started to really look at it closely, and I thought, that's an umbrella term for all the things that happen that throw us off track to getting what it is we really
Well,
want.
I think that that inner critic is probably one of the biggest ones. I mean, most people that go through life, whether, and we'll say this, they have an adverse childhood experience, or maybe it wasn't even adverse, but it was like, hey, you were always supposed to be the straight A student. That's what we wanted. You were supposed to be the doctor. You were supposed to become the teacher. And when they did or they didn't, I've spoken with many who actually attained all those degrees and at the same time still live with the imposter syndrome. And then
Uh,
I've seen people who haven't attained to any of that and are living with the imposter syndrome as well because
yeah.
they didn't live up to those expectations. But in your book, you debunk several myths about the imposter syndrome. Which myth do you find is the most pervasive and damaging? And if so, why?
Hmm. Well, I talk about 8 myths. If you don't mind, I'm going to give you 2. It's hard for me to
Okay.
just do one. Feel the fear and do it anyway is the cure for imposter syndrome. Of course you're afraid, but just do the thing, and then you'll be fine. And the imposter goes away and you're good. Now, something like 85% of the population experiences imposter syndrome. And you're talking about very accomplished people like Albert Einstein, Tina Fey, Sheryl Sandberg, you know, Steve Martin, the list goes on and on. And, you know, 7 or 8 out of 10 of the people around you, and depending on what your profession is, maybe more. And so if that were true, if you could just feel the fear and do it anyway, do you think those people would still be experiencing imposter syndrome? No, they felt the fear, they pushed through, they've done it anyway. They have these great accomplishments. So that's definitely part of the puzzle. That's part of getting to the point where you can overcome imposter syndrome. You do need to learn how to push through that fear. It's just not the cure, if that makes sense. And that can be damaging because people will say, and I've had people say this to me, oh, I'm so relieved that you tell me that, Sheryl, because I felt the fear. I did it anyway. I'm still experiencing this. And I was told I'm not supposed to be experiencing anymore. And then they suppress that emotion. And you know what happens to suppressed emotions, right? They're
Right.
not calm, they're energy and motion, and they come out in other ways. And I would say the second myth that I think is really important to debunk is it's just normal. Everyone has it. You just have to live with it. And if you really look at what the experience of imposter syndrome is, rumination, feeling less than, playing small, you know, anxiety, burnout, why would we want to normalize that? Why would we want to say you just have to live with it? That's where I got really stubborn. And if 85% of people experience imposter syndrome, what does that tell me? It tells me it's very common, but there are 15% of the population that don't. So that means I want to be one of the 15%. Why do I have to be part of the 85%? And that's what I sought out and said, okay, wait. We have to get to the root of this. There's stuff going on. We can't just cope because we'll be coping until we're 80 or 90 years old. That's no life.
Yeah. Question for you. I know that many people um there's all this area around self-compassion and self-care.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think misses in most people who probably have this imposter syndrome is this ability to self nurture, self care,
Mhm.
compassion for themselves, right? Because we're talking about, well, I can give compassion to others. Well, are you giving the same compassion to yourself? And so you actually used, I like the fact that you pointed out those two debunked myths, but you also describe different archetypes of imposter syndrome in the book.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the archetypes and how identifying with one could really help one of our listeners understand their imposter feelings better and how they might be able to use that archetype description to actually overcome it.
Absolutely, Greg. Happy to. You know, I put together this framework because I think that it's not meant to um, label anyone, but it's this idea of having better insight into us. We can understand in broad terms what imposter syndrome is, but if we don't see how it's affecting us in personally, each one of us indifferently, how do we do something about it? We're each on our own journey. We've had different experiences. We give different meaning to those experiences. Those become our beliefs and those become our reality. And so I put this framework together, and it's just a way for people to kind of see within themselves the behaviors, and then we can work back and see what the root cause is. Now, if anybody's listening to these, there are 7 of them, and you say, oh my God, I have more than one, or I have 3, or I'm all 7. FYI, I had all 7. I was experiencing, I never say really have, I don't have anything. I experienced all 7. I say that because experience is so much easier to get over, right, than something we have. I was experiencing all 7 of these, and so many of my clients and people on my panels and my groups have experienced all 7. So nothing wrong with you. It's just a way for you to understand. So first, there's the perfectionist, and I could go deep on any one of these, but I'm going to give you the surface. The perfectionist, and there's the self-critical perfectionist, and there's the other critical perfectionist, and There's the cultural perfectionist where it comes from outside sources, but they see their value through their accomplishments and the quality of those
Yeah.
accomplishments. That's their value. Remember, we're always talking about imposter syndrome. It's, am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I deserving? It's all about that value. Then the second one is the Lone Ranger. And the Lone Ranger feels like they need to go it alone. They need to do everything by themselves. Um, and part of that is they feel like if they ask someone for help, they're going to see that they're not good enough to do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So there's feeling of, I'm just going to get in there and do it myself. There's more to that story, but that's a big one. There's the people pleaser. The people pleaser, their feeling of pleasing is really connected to abandonment and rejected. They feel like their worth is in pleasing everyone. And maybe if they're very good and very nice and please everyone, they won't be abandoned or rejected. The fourth is the savior. And the savior sees their worth through fixing other people or fixing problems. They need to be needed, which is much like the people pleaser. Again, they need to be needed because they fear abandonment and rejection. There's the superhero. So a superhero is a common archetype. We hear about it. They see their worth through superhuman feats. Their biggest fear is being vulnerable or perceived as weak. And then the sixth is the master. The master never feels good enough. They just need one more degree, one more certification to be quote unquote good enough. And so their life is always achieving the next thing to be good enough. A lot of comparison there. And then there's one that you may not have heard about or thought about. It's the prodigy. The prodigy is the archetype that feels like they need to go from zero to hero or beginner to mastery immediately. We all have those zones of genius, those things that we're able to master very quickly, very easily. And so we kind of go into this comfort space because we get really good really fast, and then we get the accolades for that. And for the prodigy, they want to stick in their comfort zone because that area that's kind of messy where you're on that learning curve and you're learning something and you fall back and maybe you fail a little bit, they're so terrified of being found out as not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the seven.
Well, the good thing about you articulating those seven is that I think many of the listeners can relate to, like you said, well, if not one or two, maybe all seven. Because at certain points in our life, we're going to take on potentially a different archetype depending on where we are.
Mhm.
And so I would say, hey, get the book, everybody. Here it is. Here's a copy of the book again. Because all of those archetypes are there. Plus, she gives you opportunities by asking questions at the end of these chapters to kind of reflect and learn more. Now, we talked early. I first said, hey, the subconscious mind.
Mhm.
How does the subconscious mind play a role in the imposter syndrome? We know people will say, well, I know the ego. A lot of people use ego as edging God out. And I think sometimes when people become more spiritual in nature, they actually learn to calm these actual imposter syndrome, wherever it is coming from. So I'd like you to address the role of the subconscious mind and what strategies do you recommend for addressing subconscious beliefs that have been embedded in the subconscious mind. And as you said earlier, they kind of continue to play out. They go over and over and over and over again, and
Mhm.
people can't seem to get out of that loop.
Yeah.
It's like what's that movie, The Groundhog's Day?
Yes.
It's Groundhog's Day again, but here it comes again, right? So
Yeah.
tell us, if you would, some of the ways you have to actually jolt it and change it. I mean, one of them
Yeah.
is hypnosis. I literally had a hypnotherapy session on Sunday, right? And so the point is I recognize that when somebody professional can go in and make suggestions to reprogram that, because the the three types which you talk about are, the subconscious, the
Mm-hmm.
conscious, and the unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the superconscious,
Yes.
right? So you've got this array, and I think a lot of people understand it. They just don't know how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, this kind of goes into, I've done a lot of work with the subconscious mind, of course, being a hypnotherapist. And, what happens with imposter syndrome is people tend to focus on what they can see, what they're conscious of. And that becomes about 10% of our consciousness is in the conscious, what we call the conscious mind. And 90% is in the subconscious. And we put it in this forget it, set it and forget it kind of mode for efficiency. And so what happens is we become programmed, just like you program your computer. We can become programmed early on through our experiences and our beliefs and thoughts that we have and thoughts that others have. They get reinforced and they kind of get set into our mind, and they're usually triggered or tied to um, an initiating event. It's kind of, we call it this a root cause. And so with the subconscious mind, what the subconscious mind is, let's say you have you're a very young child and you have an experience, and maybe it's not even an adverse experience. It's not so much the experience that we have, but the meaning we give that to that experience at that age and that stage. We set it in, and our mind is programmed to make ourselves right. So now our mind is actively looking, and something else happens, and we say, "Oh, you see, I'm really not good enough." And we start to layer and layer and layer. "Oh, you see, nobody really cares what I have to say," and we layer and layer and layer. "Oh, you see, I don't have value. I am not worthy." And we layer and layer there, and we hyper focus on those areas, and we tend to minimize the proof, the evidence that we are good enough as we mature. And
And
so
it's
what
you
happens,
said as a child, and I want to go back to that because we're so impressionable at those ages,
yes,
right?
we are.
Of what actually happens in our life. And I'm going to use a quick little anecdote story because I think this might help the listeners. When I was around 8 years old, I remember being in my kitchen and my father was extremely angry with my mother, and it got into quite a fight, in the sense that he actually pushed her up against the wall. And I did not want to see that happening. So I decided to get in between my father and my mother because I was just trying to protect my mother. So this is probably a pretty typical thing that I think many young men could relate to. I did. My father got so angry with me, and I'll get to the point of this story in a second, that he picked me up and he was very strong and he shoved me against the wall. And he said, "Don't you ever come in between an argument between myself and mom." And I literally fell to the floor. Now, moral to the story. From that day forward, I decided to avoid conflict. Okay.
Yeah,
So whenever
there's your root.
conflict was in my life, I moved a different direction because I just didn't like it because I thought the consequence of it was so painful because it was extremely painful. So I think, look, I tell that story not because I want you to to feel sorry for me or anything. I tell it because it's really truly when you're 8 years old and something like that happens, it's really hard to get that out of your subconscious. It's really hard to get that out of your conscious.
Yeah, it gets really embedded in there. Great. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that, by the way. Just this morning I did a session with somebody and we went back to when he was 4 years old. He kept saying, "I want to go back to when I was 17." But I knew there was a fragment that went further back. Um, and I've gone back as far as 2 years old, but usually it's somewhere between 4 and 6 that people's
right,
memory goes. And these are very, very powerful because when you're very young, you're nonverbal.
right.
Can't express those emotions. You're just all squishy feeling and emotion. And our subconscious is the seat of our emotions. And it does drive the bus. It does drive the bus. So when I was looking at imposter syndrome and I was seeing all these great people doing this work here and working with all these amazing coping techniques and what have you, I thought something's still missing here because They're showing people how to cope better, but they're not showing people how to overcome imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
And I know that's a bold statement, but I thought what we really need is to reprogram and repattern. Inside out is the reprogramming. Let's get to those root cause
Hmm.
issues. Let's remodel those, reset those. And then we need to repattern the mind because, yes, and this takes a little bit longer and may have to be done in simultaneity. However, the brain does get patterned. We do get patterned with our, not just our behaviors, but our beliefs, thoughts, self-talk. And so we need to actually do a focused, conscious repatterning. It's really a process that is doable. That's the hope I give. And so that's my holistic approach, inside out, outside in, working with the subconscious mind, understanding how powerful it is, and that it is your best friend. It wants you to succeed. It wants to give you whatever you want, as long as you can communicate what that is. And we just don't communicate clearly.
Well,
So,
you give the readers in the book, you include these exercises to help the reader, and maybe exercises is a good word. Um, and the point is I think reprogramming
mhm.
to help the readers overcome the imposter syndrome. I'd like for you to share two of the exercise that you think the listeners listening today could actually apply to reprogram and to practice, right?
Yeah,
Because they're exercises, right? So it's
yeah,
like you're trying to build a muscle. The muscle is the brain. We're trying to reprogram the brain
yes.
to actually transmute these particular elements of our imposter syndrome.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, in the book, it takes you through four distinct phases. So you're going to go from awareness, we don't know what we don't know, even when we think we do, to insight. That was sort of the archetypes, the idea of really understanding how it affects you. And now we're kind of in the alignment phase. And there are exercises throughout. So there are 20 exercises through the book. And in the alignment phase, which is what you're talking about, it's doing these exercises. Now, doing the reprogramming is always going to be easier when you're working with someone. So if you have a trained hypnotherapist, a really good one, you can always, I don't recommend other people. I do that, I do the work, but you can probably find people to recommend to you as well. That's always helpful to have a guide. But if not, getting into kind of a deep guided meditation is very helpful. And trust yourself. Ask your subconscious mind to take you back to, first, you want to set the ground rules, and that is that you never go into a trauma. I do not believe that you ever need to relive a trauma. So you ask your subconscious mind to take you before or after a trauma, never in a trauma. And if you see it, you're seeing it like a movie. So it's on the screen and you are safe. You are okay. You will be fine. And you tell yourself this. And if you need a guided meditation for it, that's fine. But if you're going to do this on your own, you don't need to go into that. You're past it. You're done with it. Now you're just kind of understanding it with your cognitive mind, not your emotional mind. That's really important. And then you just get really quiet with yourself and trust your subconscious to take yourself back and ask for an early stage, ask for a root cause. Why do I feel not good enough?
Uh-huh.
Get me back as early as you can and talk to that child. You know, you can have a conversation. Usually, children didn't get something they needed, like nurturing or kindness, you know, or just a listening, generous ear.
Right.
Or they got something they shouldn't have gotten, like abuse or neglect. And so you just give that child what they needed. You're the adult now. You get to do that. You talk to them like you're their mother, their father, their big brother, the big sister, whoever that is that they needed, and ask them what they needed and just listen to them, you know? And that's the reprogramming. That's a very just one simple.
One of the things that I think you don't want to do, and I'm just going to make a comment, has
Yes.
nothing to do with it, is you certainly don't want to carry around regret or anger or frustration for what happened. So you've got to find a way, as you're saying, um, this isn't past life regression. This is just regression back to a point where you can remember these things, not the trauma, as you said,
Yes.
but the actual things before and afterwards. And the healing comes, and I think, in the acceptance of that versus the resistance to it, right? So I think for a long time, I know for me personally, I had resistance to it, not acceptance of it, right?
Yes.
So if there was an event that I didn't like, I was like resisting,
Yes.
right? And I know that all of those were good for me, right? It's like these are all learning lessons, but you only know these when you be, as you said, become aware in your steps, aware that they're there for a reason, right? There's a
Yes.
reason for all of these things. There's a reason for me getting in between my mom and my dad and me going through this conflict where I didn't want to get involved with conflict. So I just tell the listeners that are listening now, it's you have to learn how to um, accept it.
Yes. You know, it's kind of like the analogy would be you have a dark closet and you're afraid. You're afraid there's monsters in the closet. And then when you turn on the light or shine a flashlight in, you see it's just clothes. There's nothing else there, maybe some toys. You're good. And it's the same thing with our subconscious mind. You're going to feel that fear. You're going to want to turn the other way. You're not going to want to go there. But when you do, and again, not going into any adverse experiences, nothing traumatic, but just looking at it and shine the light, you'll see it's not that bad. And
Right.
what happens is you're able to express those heavy emotions and get rid of them, release them, and you'll feel lighter. And the awareness starts to grow and you heal and you
So
be
what would you say are some of the long-term strategies for maintaining an imposter-free
oh, this is the
life
best part. Thank you for
after
asking this.
after initially overcoming these feelings? I mean, it's one thing to talk about these things. It's another thing for us to embed them in our DNA, for it to become part of us, and for us to live it and believe it. And I would say that it becomes our truth, right? So this is the
Yes.
truth for me. What is the new big T, as I say, in my life? What are some of these long-term strategies?
Yeah. So the most important thing I'm going to tell you today is this. There's a term I coined, it's chapter 5 in my book called the healthy zone. And I want you to understand, I want you to think of a circle here in the middle, right? And outside of the circle is what we're going to call maladaptive territory. And the circle is your healthy zone. And the reason it's a circle and not a dot, a fixed spot, is because we're dynamic beings. We're meant to feel and experience, and we need some movement and growth, but we need to be able to be adaptive in that. So fear is our friend. We need fear. It keeps us safe. If we had no fear, we'd run into the lion's den. Not good. We'd jump off a cliff, right? Not good. Without a parachute, let's say.
Right,
So we need fear. We need doubt. Doubt's our discernment muscle. We need comparison. How do we know who we are if we don't know who we're not? Sometimes we
right.
really are not good enough. We understand that in the healthy zone. I'm not a good enough neurosurgeon to cut into your brain. In fact, I'm not a neurosurgeon at all. So if you ask me to do brain surgery on you, I would say I'm not good, right? So
I would
it's
say
not like
so.
I'm always good enough. I'm not good enough for certain things. And
Well, you're
sometimes
doing brain surgery on people without using instruments, right? It's not like you're cutting or you're probing. You're probing verbally, you're probing
yes,
with great questions, but you
yes,
are a brain surgeon in the degree that you get people to look at it in a different way. And that is brain surgery, because most people don't need brain surgery, meaning physical surgery. They
right.
need emotional brain surgery,
Yeah,
and you're the emotional brain surgeon.
yeah. Get the circuits reconnected. And so what happens is we become familiar. And, we tend to see familiarity and safety as the same thing. So if something is very familiar, even if it's not safe, our mind tells us it's safe. It kind of goes back to those caveman days, right? We try to stay safe. Our mind wants to keep us safe. And so if we're out here in maladaptive territory, it's become so familiar, we tend to want to stick there. And first thing we need to do is understand what is actually healthy with fear and what isn't. We need to get back into the zone and kind of get a feel for it and say, this is not good. This kind of doubt that paralyzes me, that's maladaptive doubt. But doubt in the healthy zone says, okay, wait, let's just check this guy out. Let's check this woman out. Let's check this opportunity out. Well, I'm not sure. It sounds really good, what they're saying, but I want to poke some holes and I want to learn some other perspectives. Maybe I'm not seeing everything. That's healthy doubt. Doubt that I can do something. Let's see, I've never done that thing before. I've never climbed Mount Everest. Maybe I think I can, but I doubt that I'm ready right now. That's healthy doubt. Maybe I need to do some training. So that's what healthy doubt is. Paralyzing doubt is where I go, I can't do that thing. I never do that thing. And you literally are paralyzed. You don't move forward. You play small. You pass up on opportunities. No, maybe you just need to get back in the healthy zone. And if it's something you really want to do, you get the resources, you do the training, you get the knowledge, you find a way to get yourself to that place. So first we have to do is get a sense of that, and then something will happen. Grace, you'll get that call and somebody you love is ill or something terrible happened or you lost that client or you lost that job. And it's like that pendulum will want to swing out to the maladaptive territory. But now you know how to work with your mind. You know how to work with some different coping strategies you have. And you just get it back into the ease, back into the zone. Because now you know, and that's how you overcome imposter syndrome. Yeah, I'm going to feel like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough, but I'm going to work with my mind. I'm going to get myself into the healthy zone.
Well, I think one of the things that you're saying, and it's very clear, I was reflecting on a book called Uncertainty by Jonathan Fields. And one of the things he said in a podcast was, you have to walk through uncertainty to get to opportunity. And I think, there's lots of opportunity for people to identify what this is and then walk through and mentally change their perspective and their mindset around this imposter syndrome. You don't have to live with this. And Sheryl is the person that you can go to. And again, we'll put a link to the website for her and a link to the book on Amazon. I would encourage you all to get a copy of this because the way it's laid out is very unique. I like the layout of the book. It's an easy read, it's not tough. And the practices and the exercises that you can get will really help you. So it's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth and being able to get some of your wisdom around the imposter that lies within us. And thank you for being a guest on the show. Any last words of wisdom you want to leave with the listeners?
Thank you so much, Greg. It's been fantastic. I will just tell you, by the way, you do have, if you go to my website, there is an imposter syndrome, and there is also an audio book out. But I just want to just say this, and I want you to hear this wherever you are, whether you're in the car, whether you're sitting at your desk, wherever you are in your life right now, you are good enough. You are worthy.
Mhm.
You are deserving. Your voice matters and you matter.
Good way to end it. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.